Welcome back to another episode of ROC Boys Football, taking a look at a 2023 first-round NFL mock draft from Tom Fornelli. This is one of my favorite guys to listen to look at his work. He comes from a standpoint of kind of like Dill, where we come from. Like, he watches a lot of college football and focuses more on the evaluation of the college prospects as opposed to the team fits. And so looking at his work, I love looking at it. Before we get into it, I just want to say thank you to you guys. Again, if you're taking a look at NFL mock draft videos, talking college prospects this early on in the scene, like you're big, you love this stuff. We love this stuff. So again, if you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We appreciate all the support. Over 4,000 subscribers on the channel. We appreciate you guys. The support you guys have shown truly means a lot to the boys. Dill, let's get into this. And what I want to focus on is the quarterbacks and what it might look like in those top 5 picks. We obviously have like those 3 top quarterbacks in this class in Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, and Will Levis. And that's where Tom Fornelli has all 3 of these guys going. He has the Colts trading up with that number 1 spot to get CJ Stroud. Bryce Young going 2 to the Houston Texans. This would be an ideal spot for Houston. And then the Panthers sitting there, trading up to pick 3 and getting Will Levis. What are your early takes here on the top 3 quarterbacks off the board in the first 3 picks?
I mean, probably my biggest thing is you cannot, if you're the Panthers, trade up to go grab Will Levis. Like that pick to me, because Will Anderson and Jalen Carter are both rock solid prospects, like that pick is super valuable. I think the Cardinals are going to want a lot in return.
Yep.
And when you go up and you take a hit on a guy like Will Levis, like you're not these top 2 guys, I would trade my whole team to get these top 2 guys if I was one of these bad teams. But if I'm like the third team in this row of quarterback selections, I'm really careful about not trading too much to get Will Levis, just because I don't think he's like this blue chip prospect in any stretch of the imagination. He's a high risk to me.
See, we've talked about this a lot. Like, I am a lot higher on Will Levis than most. And I even, when we did a Carolina Panthers mock draft, I had the Panthers trading up for Will Levis. I think it was at the 6th spot. But again, this Carolina team, in my point of view, is a team that's ready to go win the NFC South. You look at the other teams in the NFC South, and they're all in a really bad situation. If there's a team that I want to see Will Levis go to, it's the Carolina Panthers. I mean, at Kentucky, he had a phenomenal 2021 season with a great offensive coordinator. They had a good offensive line and some nice weapons at the wide receiver spot with the good run game. And then you were having talks of Will Levis being the number 1 prospect. And then in 2022, he was banged up. I believe he had turf toe, a shoulder injury, was getting shots before every game, and kind of just gritted it out. But that team stunk. They had a new offensive coordinator who stunk. They could not run the football or protect Will Levis. And then on top of that, the receivers he was throwing to were just 2 true freshmen and a transfer from Virginia Tech. That was pretty much it. And Will Levis still made some big-time throws, and that team is horrible.
Well, that's the problem. Of course, he makes some big time throws. That's why we're even thinking possibly about him being a first rounder. But then you see so many mind boggling, like how are you going to miss that guy? How are you going to be so uncomposed in the pocket and just start running around almost at the drop? I get the offensive line wasn't great, but like it's not going to be great in the pros either. You need to sometimes be a star. You need to be like a Brady when you're going to go that high, where you just transform the guys around you and adapt to your situation and make it better. He obviously,
I think he did. That team is not a bowl eligible team without Will Levis at quarterback. And that was a 75, maybe even less % healthy Will Levis. And my final argument for Will Levis, and one, again, I love him going to Carolina because this roster is not bad. Like, Carolina has a solid defense. I think they've done a phenomenal job developing an offensive line. And a guy like DJ Moore with Sam Darnold at the arm kind of looked back to be a top 10, top 15 receiver in the league. This is a perfect landing spot for a quarterback that you need to develop and that you need to surround with a little bit more talent. And then, like, Will Levis, if you put him on a Tennessee, you put him on an Ohio State with all those receivers and a great offensive line, I think his film looks a lot different. And some of those missed throws, I think, have a lot more to do with the wide receivers not really knowing how to sit down in zone coverage, not really knowing if it's in man coverage, you keep running that route. A lot of those misses seem to be a little bit more of a lack of communication with his young inexperienced receivers as opposed to Will Levis just missing the throw.
I think the mechanics aren't always great. I think he doesn't set his feet all the time, and he throws high. That's kind of what I saw with his game, and that's my big concern is his pocket presence is. I mean, when things weren't really good, he did seem to just scramble about and like kind of lose control of the game, and that to me, when you're going to take a guy that high, you need him to be a program changer or a team changer, and that when you can't maintain composure in tough spots, that to me is my huge red flag of jumping up that far to pick him. Now, you look at these other two guys. I those two are bona fide studs.
Yes.
When they didn't have things going perfectly. So I mean, Bryce Young didn't have a ton to work with this year at Alabama, and he made it work. He elevated everyone around him. He made those receivers better.
Agreed.
Made that offensive line better. And then you saw Stroud do the same thing against Georgia. That was like the one missing thing with Stroud because everything else is pretty much perfect. The guy throws dots all over the field. He probably has the most arm talent in this draft. It's close with him and Young, but he's a sick passer. But he's another guy who, in a huge spot, he showed he can take his team to a new level, even down a guy like Marvin Harrison.
There might not be a game that's improved someone's draft stock like that semifinal against Georgia for CJ Stroud, because that was the one question is CJ Stroud really never had to deal with much pressure. It was a lot of clean pockets, and it was a lot of wide receivers getting open. And he was making the throws and looked awesome, but that wasn't a situation where it was really hard to look awesome. Georgia, he had to do a little bit of extended plays, going off his reads, playing a little backyard football, and he did that extremely well. And I think that's what NFL teams were looking for because, quite frankly, it's not going to look like that when you get to the next level. And he made it look – he was phenomenal. And so I still like C.J. Stroud at 2. I like Bryce Young as my number 1 quarterback. I just think a team like the Carolina Panthers, who've just been left holding the bag for so long with a quarterback in this draft, I think Will Levis is a guy that you kind of take a flyer on because,
again, but if you do that and you miss, and there's a good chance you miss on Will Levis, he is not even in the ballpark of those top 2 guys. I think you need to trade up so much to get him right now just because of how good Jalen Carter and Will Anderson are and how valuable that pick would be to Arizona. I just think you're going to need to give up too much of a king's ransom. And then if you miss on him, you're done for like 5 years. Like you've set your team. A team that, as you mentioned, is growing into something that looks like it could be competitive.
But they won't be competitive unless they have a quarterback that's a difference maker. And Will Levis could be a difference maker unless they're going out in free agent and landing. And that's another thing we got to talk about is the free agent market doesn't look as lucrative as it once did. I mean, Tom Brady chooses to retire, so that's one free agent off the board. And then Aaron Rodgers is going on his darkness retreat, and you don't even know if he's coming back from that. Like Aaron Rodgers is not a commodity that you're relying on in the free agent market. So I think it makes sense for Carolina. I get it's risky, but Carolina has so consistently kind of eaten their vegetables, not traded up, drafted really good players. This might be the time where you pull the trigger and try to go find your franchise quarterback that's just been missing for so long. Now, I want to talk about, like, this is a perfect scenario for the Bears. They trade down to 4 and arguably get the number 1 player in the draft in Jalen Carter, a massive position need on the interior defensive line. But what I want to focus on more is I don't think the Cardinals shouldn't really be – I mean, they are full rebuild, I think. Not full rebuild, but they're rebuilding a little bit. You get a lot of picks, but passing up on Will Anderson or Jalen Carter at 3 has to be very, very difficult because, again, at that 3 spot, you're getting one of the best players in the whole entire draft.
Well, that's what I'm saying, why I feel like it's me hard to get that 3rd pick because it's when you can take a guy who's a number 1 overall player, and I think Carter and Anderson in any given year could be in that discussion to be number 1. It's just that they're bumping into 2 really, really good quarterbacks, obviously, but there are guys who can go 1st overall, and then you were sitting there at 3 and you don't need a quarterback exactly. It's a good spot to be because those 2 they're monsters. They're really good.
All right. This is ideal for the Seattle Seahawks. And I think it's something that we really could see is a guy like Jalen Carter or Will Anderson falling to them to 5 if Will Levis, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud go in that top 4, top 3 area. I mean, this makes Pete Carroll's decision a lot easier. Like it was more between Myles Murphy, Tyree Wilson. Now the decision's it ain't that hard. You go get Will Anderson, who, in my opinion, is a top 3 guy in this draft. You get him at 5 at a position of need. and he's a perfect guy for what Pete Carroll wants, a tradesy dude. That's a no-brainer. Another kind of interesting team to talk about is the Detroit Lions with that 6 overall pick. Bryan Bresee was like a guy that you saw mocked to them for a very long time. When you get into Bryan Bresee's 2022 film, it's very hard to pick him with that 6 overall pick because, quite frankly, that film was more of a day 2 pick. But when you go back and watch him as a true sophomore before he goes down with the ACL, specifically against Georgia, I mean, there's so much to like about him. You go watch him as a true freshman. Like, this dude is different. 6'5", 305 pounds, different movement skills. Are you taking Bryan Bresee at 6 overall here if you're Detroit Lions?
I mean, 100% they could, and I wouldn't fault him for the pick at all because I think he is, again, if he doesn't deal with health issues and some off the field things, not in any way in his control, he puts a year together with development from his freshman year. He's right up there with Jalen Carter, Will Anderson. Because
I even said before this season, and now it looks like a horrible take, and it was a horrible take, was how far is Bryan Bresee from Jalen Carter? When they're both the same age. When you look at their true freshman film, when you look at their true sophomore film before Bryan Bresee goes down, like those guys were neck and neck for interior defensive line number 1. And then Jalen Carter obviously put a lot of distance for himself in 2022. Bryan Bresee is a guy that if you're going to take him with the top 10 pick, it's because of what you saw before he went down with that ACL and before what you saw on the field in 2022. The Raiders, they're kind of that team that is left holding the bag. At pick 7, they go out and just get a blue chip offensive lineman and Peter Skoronski, who there are question marks if he can play tackle, but he's going to be really, really good at the next level. Wherever he plays, and that's a team that's missed on so many draft picks. You're not going to miss with Peter Skoronski. Does he have the ceiling of a guy like Paris Johnson or Broderick Jones? Probably not, but the floor is just so high. I think you really, really like him. And then Tyree Wilson, Dill, I want to talk a little bit about Tyree Wilson and Lukas Van Ness, quite frankly, going to pick 8 to the Falcons, pick 9 to the Cardinals. What are your takes on these two edge guys who are very, very tradesy? But, I mean, I still have Myles Murphy ahead of both these guys.
Well, frankly, I don't think these two are very close to each other, like Wilson versus Van Ness. And Van Ness had some moments this year, but there wasn't. You just didn't see enough of them, and there were moments like you saw the big, athletic, powerful. And those like those hyper athletic traits you want to see. But Tyree Wilson showed them too. He also had 10 plus. What do you have, like 12 sacks or something? I mean, he just played at a different level all year. Van Ness was like a part-time player in a sense, which is concerning. I don't know that I trust Iowa's coaches at this point in their development when what they're doing with that program, but there must have been some reason he wasn't playing enough, and that's obviously a little concerning because you got to be on the field, you got to be able to produce, and you got to be able to show you can play 60 snaps a game if you're going to be taken that high. And I just guess you didn't see that with Lukas Van Ness, where Tyree Wilson, you saw he was a monster this year. At times, like in the NC State game, he just looked unblockable, too big, too strong. Has developed he's a solid pass rusher. I don't think he's got like that technician level that some of these other guys, like even you could argue a Myles Murphy has, but man, you see a lot of like the traits you want to see in it.
Yeah, if Tyree Wilson ends up going above Myles Murphy, it's because there's a defensive coordinator saying, go get me Tyree Wilson. Let me work with him because this guy can be a freak if he kind of unlocks his potential. And I think that gets lost, and we'll talk a little bit about Myles Murphy, who goes much later in this draft than expected. Is people forget how tradesy Myles Murphy is. Like, Myles Murphy isn't just a solid player who could be a top 10 pick. Like, this dude could be an all-pro edge rusher as well. I think the same thing could be said with Myles Murphy. One, you're a little concerned with the lack of development from the 2021 film to 2022. There's a reason he was a top 10 player coming out of high school. He's a very tradesy dude that I think is going to kind of open people's eyes to that at the combine. I think once Myles Murphy gets his testing on the table and teams get reminded of, okay, yeah, Myles Murphy is also a freak, I think we'll see Myles Murphy kind of back in that top 10, top 8 selection. Philadelphia Eagles, they're just probably going best player available. Devon Witherspoon is kind of emerging as cornerback 1. Right now, cornerback 2 on my board. But, man, he is a very, very solid player. That the only question is I wish he played in the Senior Bowl, but he didn't really need to, and I get why he opted out of it. Like, going up against the Big Ten West wide receivers, like, outside of the Purdue film, like, he wasn't really tested. Like, even a team like Michigan doesn't have the wide receivers to really, like, give you a good reference of how good Devon Witherspoon can be with some of these top wide receivers. And then possibly my favorite fit is pick 11, Paris Johnson Jr. going to Tennessee, an absolute road grader in the run game. It seems like a match made in heaven for Paris Johnson Jr.
Yeah, and that does. It feels like a foregone conclusion that Tennessee's taking a tackle. Now, yeah, I guess it'll depend on what the Raiders do because that's the only other team that would make sense at all to take a tackle.
Yep.
And if they get their pick, it would certainly would make sense to go Johnson because he is probably the best run blocker, at least the best power run blocker.
It has to be Paris Johnson or Broderick Jones to the Tennessee Titans at 11. And I think one of them will be there. And I think that's where Tennessee will go. Pick 12. First, and this is where I'm telling you, this is where me and Tom Fornelli are kind of agree, is when you watch Jaxon Smith-Njigba in 2021, he was easily the best wide receiver. He's getting pushed down boards because he might not have that long speed that some of the other wide receivers do. And he might not be as athletic and test as well as some of those elite wide receivers that we've seen in years past. But when you talk about, and we said this before, I'm very happy that he included him in a top 12 pick. When you talk about receivers that just get the position and are good at the position, Jaxon Smith-Njigba is wide receiver 1 in this class for that reason.
Yeah, I mean, he's a nails prospect. I still think I have Quentin Johnson a little higher.
Same.
Just because what you talk about, like athletically, Johnson is, I mean, he's a special athlete, big, makes contested catches, but he's a guy who I think even at that size was able to generate a lot of separation in the short and intermediate range. And when they needed a play on third down, they were going to him. 3rd and 5, he'd catch slants and he'd do what he needed to do to make those plays. And that's kind of what you think about when you think JSN. I just think Johnson adds another dimension to the explosive play game because he, as good of tracking a football in the air, makes big time catches over defensive backs, and he can fly. You saw what he did against Michigan, made some huge plays. And when they need
big moments.
Yeah.
But in the crazy part for Jaxon Smith-Njigba is like you think about all those good, like Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave looking like they'll be very good wide receivers at the next level. I mean, Jaxon Smith-Njigba was arguably the best wide receiver on that team in 2021. Like when they needed a big play, they were going to Jaxon Smith-Njigba. Another question is, can he play on the outside? I think he can. I wish we got to see it in 2022. You're not playing on the outside with Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson in your offense. But even if he doesn't, like you see a lot of these top receivers just move all the way around. Jaxon Smith-Njigba is going to be great. And you pair him up with a guy like Bryce Young. You got to be very excited about that. Broderick Jones, offensive tackle 3 off the board at pick 13. That one makes a lot of sense. And then Myles Murphy falling to 14. Bill Belichick will be absolutely thrilled if you have a guy like Myles Murphy sitting on the board when you're picking 14th overall.
If you can get him outside the top 10, you have to take him. Even if you're like the Titans, you don't necessarily need him, but like it's really tough for me to like pass up on him once he falls past like 6. Because again, what you mentioned, I get like maybe there wasn't a ton of development from 21 to 22, but he was just really good both years. He just maybe didn't become Will Anderson good in 22. And then again, I don't think he has shown any argument to put him in with Will Anderson for DE1, but I mean, I have him as number 2 and he's certainly right there. He's the second best tape, I think, overall of defensive ends behind Will Anderson. I think
in 2021, like it's really close. The 2021 film is phenomenal. And Myles, the only guy I would have had maybe above him is Jared Verse, who was kind of nipping at his heels during early in the process. Then he decides to go back to school. Myles Murphy's easily edge 2. I think he has an extremely high floor as well. Like he's going to be good at the next level. He's very good against the run. This would be a steal. And this is what Bill Belichick's known for, is finding some of that value. Pick 15, Michael Mayer. I don't know if it's like prospect fatigue or anything, but I don't think Michael Mayer I think he's still probably tight end 1, and I'm still working through my tight end position rankings that are actually probably coming out on Sunday. So if you are interested in that, stay tuned for that. But I don't think Michael Mayer is the playmaker at tight end that warrants a top 15 pick overall. I think he's tight end 1. But in a class where this tight end group is so good, and if you want a tight end, you're probably getting a really solid guy in day 2. I don't know if I'm taking Michael Mayer top 15 overall.
Yeah, and taking a tight end is top 20 is, to me, it's tough unless it's like a Kyle Pitts or somebody who's got some like generational skill and or Brock Bowers. He'll certainly be in that conversation when he comes out next year. But like what you mentioned, Michael Mayer is just like Michael Mayer is a really good tight end, but that's pretty much what he is. He's just a really good inline tight end.
And I don't know if he's the difference maker that you're using as a top 15 pick.
Well, yeah, that's like because he's not going to run a wildly fast time. I mean, he does he's really good at what he does, and I still probably have him tight end one, but he's just not that generational skill guy.
I agree. And the production was there. I think more of a product of they didn't really have a quarterback that could push the ball down the field. They didn't have the wide receivers that could stretch the field. And so by default, if they were throwing the football, it's Michael Mayer over the middle, who's very good at that. And you mentioned it. He uses his hands extremely well, runs solid routes, catches the football at a high level. But I don't know if he's a difference maker on that offense. Christian Gonzalez at pick 16, the Commanders need a cornerback. Christian Gonzalez is a top 3 cornerback easily on the board. That makes a lot of sense. And Joey Porter Jr. as well. I'm leaning the Steelers to go get an offensive tackle if Broderick Jones or Paris Johnson Jr., Peter Skoronski is on the board. If they are not, I mean, Joey Porter Jr. going to Pittsburgh, that seems to just make too much sense, especially with his dad having played for the Steelers. And then Detroit Lions, I think this is the biggest miss when I was looking at this before we went live. They need a cornerback. If you're Detroit and you go get Bryan Bresee, BJ Ojulari, for one, I'm not a huge fan on. I think he'll be better in the NFL than he was at college with all the defensive coordinator and scheme changes that he had to go through at LSU. But if you're leaving this round 1 and you're Detroit without a cornerback, with how good this class is, I think it's a massive fail. I mean, you take a look at some of these cornerbacks that you could be going with here. Cam Smith would be a really nice option. Obviously, Joey Porter Jr. gets picked before, but Eli Ricks, Keely Ringo, Emmanuel Forbes, all guys that I think will be good at the next level. I don't think BJ Ojulari, especially when you drafted him.
Like if you watch BJ Ojulari this year, I don't know how you can think first round. It just like he wasn't wildly productive, wasn't. And I get even if the sack numbers weren't there, but like he wasn't generating a whole lot of pressure. He didn't look really hard to block for most tackles. I don't know. I don't know that he's shown enough that, and he doesn't seem to me like with the eye-popping athleticism that maybe a guy like say a Tyree Wilson, if he didn't produce, I mean, you'd still see the traits like huge, athletic, and all that. I don't know that you see that exactly with BJ Ojulari. So to me, it's hard to justify that pick. That seems high.
Pick 19. Obviously,
is everyone just going to have Richardson going to the Bucs? Is that like a foregone conclusion?
I feel like it's as chalky as it comes. Obviously, they have Kyle Trask. They like to gate at quarterbacks. I'd honestly at this point be surprised if you see Will Levis, Bryce Young, and CJ Stroud all go in the top 3. I'd be surprised if Anthony Richardson's available at 19 because I think another team. And again, me and you disagree on the fact that if you don't have a quarterback, you got to keep swinging until you find one. And Anthony Richardson, I get, is even more of a lottery ticket than Will Levis is in terms of the high-end traits, but the absolute bust potential. There's going to be a team that's going to fall in love with the traits of Anthony Richardson. He is a project, a massive, massive project. But I feel like this is a team that's going to be like, this guy could be really, really special at the next level, and we're going to take a shot at him. I'd be surprised if he falls to 19.
I get that. There's just some, like, unbelievably good players on the board right now. I mean, you're thinking – with that corner class, I think there's some really good edge rushers still that in Fornelli's situation. I don't know. It's hard to take him because there's just some really, really good football players.
Who did Seattle? So Seattle gets Will Anderson at 5, which is a massive win. I'm not a huge fan of O'Cyrus Torrence here. I love O'Cyrus Torrence as a prospect. I just don't. I think there are a lot of good interior offensive linemen. I don't know if O'Cyrus Torrence is a difference maker. Especially when you have a guy like Jordan Addison, who I almost feel like Tom Fornelli had the Seattle Seahawks pass on just so he could put him at the Chargers. But I think Seattle could use another wide receiver. I mean, DK's awesome. Tyler Lockett, more of a slot guy. Jordan Addison falling outside the top 20. I think Seattle should take a stab at him. And if they don't, I mean, the Chargers are getting a massive, massive steal at pick 21.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I think that Addison makes a lot of sense. I mean, Johnson still hasn't gone. He would make sense. I think, again, you look at what Seattle's got. Like Lockett is getting up there in age. They've missed on a couple wideouts in the past. I think you get a good, valuable wideout in a later portion of this draft just because this is kind of where they belong. They're not top 10 players, I don't think, these wideouts, but they are really good for this range.
And it's rare, like in this class, like you look at some of the wide receivers, they're much more slot wide receivers. They're not boundary guys. And I'd be surprised if Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson go 21, 22 to the Ravens and Chargers respectively, because they're really, I mean, when you look at the top 5, and I don't know, I know you have some question marks about JSN potentially being able to move around, But outside of those guys like Zay Flowers, Josh Downs, Tank Dell, they're all more slot guys who are going to have to play more on the inside. I would be surprised if you see like the only two true boundary wide receivers in Jordan Addison and Quentin Johnson fall this low, because the NFL values wide receivers. They don't want to have to go out and pay a wide receiver. The wide receiver market is insane. And when you can go get a very solid boundary wide receiver like a Jordan Addison, like a Quentin Johnson, I'd be really surprised if they fall down outside the top 20 here.
Yeah,
especially Quentin Johnson.
Oh yeah, and I don't even get that. Like, he's not going to make it to the Ravens. Who knows what the Ravens will do? They've struggled so much at that wideout spot to get a guy who can make it work. So I think they should if they could do it, but I just don't see that as being feasible for them. But they should be thinking about wideout because they need someone to play and make something happen there.
The Vikings obviously need help in the secondary. They go out and get Emmanuel Forbes, who Dill, me and you both love. I think we like when you look at, I'm going to pull up my cornerback rankings. There's some cornerbacks I like a little bit more than Emmanuel Forbes. Emmanuel Forbes was phenomenal. I think I'm going to have him over Cam Smith. But, I mean, Eli Ricks, Keely Ringo, those guys are all in this discussion to be that. And I think this would be a solid pick. And the Vikings are in a really good spot. If you want to address that cornerback position, at 23, there's going to be a very good cornerback available. Pick 24, Brian Branch to the Jags. Eat your vegetables. This is a really, really good football player on the defensive side of the ball that can do a lot of different things. I think he's more kind of a box safety, more of a nickel guy that he showed at Alabama. But you can also play him at safety. And when you have an opportunity to get a guy like Brian Branch who's just really good at the sport, you got to go get him. I think he could go as high as 10 to the Eagles.
Because I think he is far and away the best safety in this class, or the best at what he does, where secondary player that's not a pure corner. Just because you look at what he did at Bama, he played a ton of nickel. He was a really good slot man cover guy, really good blitzer, made a lot of plays there, and tackles well. So I think with him, you didn't necessarily see a true free safety necessarily, but just my sense of watching him makes me think you put him anywhere, he's just going to make plays, because that's who he's doing in Alabama. He'd play at linebacker, he'd play at corner, he'd play at nickel, he'd play anywhere, and he made it happen.
And he's a force in the run game as well. 569 slaps from the slot, only 25 at that deep safety position. I think he can. I think he's athletic enough to do it. I just think he's better around the football because he's a playmaker. Pick 25, the Giants obviously need a wide receiver. For the Giants' purpose, I hope a guy like Jordan Addison or Quentin Johnson falls. If they don't, they go up and get Zay Flowers, who I also like. I know you're not as high on, but again, the Giants need some playmakers for Daniel Jones. Zay Flowers can be that guy.
Yeah, and especially in their offense where they're a little more creative, I think that's where Zay Flowers thrives, because he's a guy, put the ball in his hand, he makes a lot of plays. Now, I don't think he's the best pure wide receiver, like the best pure axe or something.
Yep.
But when you're in an offense that like Dable likes to run, which is a lot of movement, he's just a creative play caller. I think that's where Zay Flowers really, really could shine.
Him and Wan'Dale Robinson getting healthy, like that could be a really fun tandem to watch. Again, they're both undersized guys, but they're also very, very good at getting open and being electric after the catch with the football. Pick 26, the Cowboys go get Cam Smith. Rockoff, is very thrilled with this. Cam Smith continues to get pushed down my board. I think it's a little bit more productive. I like some other cornerbacks a little bit more. Cam Smith is handsy. He's a competitor, and I really like that. He's got good ball skills. He makes big time plays, which obviously the Cowboys value. But Cam Smith and Trayvon Diggs doesn't necessarily seem like a match made in heaven. I feel like that defense could be given up.
Maybe you'd want more of a pure cover guy, like a Clark Phillips or someone who's just, you stick him on somebody. He's not going to commit any penalties. He's not going to probably get picks, but he's going to be really, really good. And that's kind of me, because like you already have Trayvon Diggs. He is the playmaker on that defense. And again, you line them both up. I feel like you might just give up some too many big plays.
But you also could be just making a lot of big time turnovers as well. And that's kind of what the Cowboys want to do.
Yeah, no, 100%. But I don't know enough about defense, and I don't know if you can have like two of those ultra aggressive corners, because like, do you need then two safeties? Or I don't know how that exactly shakes out, but that's almost in my mind. What I'm thinking is you got two guys who are they're playing to take the ball away, and obviously that's high risk, high reward style. Like, it almost feels like it makes sense to get a guy who plays a little, not a sounder game, but a more safe.
I
Standard.
will say I'm really starting to fall in love with Eli Ricks at Bam. The more I watch him, like really smooth, puts his hands on people extremely well at the line of scrimmage. He didn't play that much, so the sample size is small. But I want to see him test. I want to see the 40 because I do have questions about the long speed. But man, Eli Ricks is flying up my board, and Cam Smith kind of not plummeting down my board, but he's definitely getting knocked down my board by some really good cornerbacks. Antonio Johnson going to the Bills. I love this pick. Antonio Johnson was a top 15 guy on my board coming into the year. I think they need to replace some safeties and get some more guys in there, and they need some playmakers. And I think Antonio Johnson, he's a playmaker. That, again, a guy that you can line up pretty much anywhere on the football field and make your defense a little bit better.
And that's, to me, it feels like, okay, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde have been incredible for the Bills for a while, and they're both getting up there, both health. I think, they could probably use a couple games off once in a while. And
Yeah.
I think what you can do with Johnson is when those two are on the field, I think he can play when you need him in the nickel, when you need him playing close to the ball. He's got that versatility where he doesn't only need to be a pure safety. You can kind of put him around the box. He'll be tough. Like, I do think he missed some tackles, which I'd like to see him clean up, but he's very aggressive, really tough, wants to be there. So I think he's a guy who you could pair with those two, even and give them maybe a bit of a breather at times as well, and then develop into being that really solid, just pure safety.
And to your missed tackles, like when you watch them on the film, it's a little bit out of control, but I feel like you could equip a lot of those missed tackles. I'm playing downhill. I'm playing extremely aggressive. And sometimes you miss tackles when you get going like that. But that's kind of the type of player you want on your defense. And I feel like it's a type of player the Bills want on their defense. The Bengals go get, Anton Harrison falling to pick 28. We both have him. I think comfortably in our top 25.
I would have thought the Steelers I think if he's there and the Steelers and the top three are gone, or even if they're not all gone, I think he makes a ton of sense there. I'd be stunned to see him make it to the Bengals, but the Bengals can get him. That really helps the Bengals.
And then Bijan finally going off the board to the Saints. Bijan Robinson could go as high as like 10 to the Eagles. I think he's probably going in the top 20 just because I think he's different. He's a different running back. And I get the NFL's going away from those those high, like putting a lot of capital into running backs. But Bijan Robinson's different.
I'm fascinated to know who Tom Fornelli has above Bijan Robinson. Like, that's such a ridiculous take in my mind. I don't even think it was close. Like, Bijan was so far and away the best running back in college football, and he has been for probably 2 or 3 years. So I don't know.
Oh, you're looking at that position rank of second? Yeah.
It's like ridiculous. Like, no one's really in his league. He's just, again, what we talk about. He catches the ball like a wide out. He has top end speed. He runs harder than anyone else in between the tackles. He's just like perfect. I don't know how to argue.
ROC last time made a really good point in the sense that if you're looking for an offensive playmaker to make your offense have a little bit more juice, and the wide receiver group is not what it has been in the past couple of draft classes, Bijan Robinson might be that guy that adds the most value and the most explosiveness to an offense because he's not just a between the tackle running back. He also runs phenomenal routes. He's a phenomenal receiving running back. And again, if you're looking to move away from Alvin Kamara, who's probably going to be suspended for a decent part of 2023, because there's no better running back. He's the highest running back we've graded since Saquon Barkley went number 2 overall to the Giants. Man, Bijan is special. Pick 30, Nolan Smith. Not necessarily the most sexy pick. He dealt with a lot of injuries in college, especially his last year in 2022. But he's a weird prospect because he's a really good pass rusher, had a really good pass rush win rate. 6'3", 235 pounds. He's also a hammer against the run, and he's a guy that's just really good. You can move him around. I like Nolan Smith.
I'm coming back around. I feel like I was down on him all season, and oh wow, he's not growing into the like ultra premier pass rusher. And I don't necessarily think he is that, but him in the back end of the first round, early second, feels like a really good pick to me. Where again, I'm still a little surprised he's had some guys like Felix Anaduke is out. My guy. I'm surprised he's falling, and same with the Tennessee guy. I'm blanking on his name, but he's
Byron Young.
No. Isaiah something, right?
Oh, Missouri, Isaiah McGuire. Yeah, he's a dog. He's your dog. You should not be forgetting his name. You're just banging the table.
That's no good. But like,
Cut it.
I don't know why those two haven't been picked yet. But again, Nolan Smith, like I'm kind of watching him. You see some of those pass rush wins he has against Oregon. You're kind of like, wow, we saw for a year of this guy.
And he's also a hammer in the run game. Like he plays with incredible leverage. He gets it. He plays his responsibility extremely well. And he's like the reason. And this is a weird take, but when you talk to like the Georgia staff and Kirby Smart and even the other players in the locker room, what made that Georgia defense so good in 2021 and 2022? Who was the heartbeat? You would have thought it would be like Nakobe Dean or Trayvon Walker or Jordan Davis. Like everyone points to Nolan Smith. Like, he was the guy. And so you're not only getting a phenomenal player, but you're getting a dude that was kind of
leader.
Took a lot of responsibility for elevating that defense.
100%.
Last pick in the first round, John Michael Schmitz. He's awesome. John Michael Schmitz is the best center in this class. I think he proved that at the Senior Bowl. He deals with power extremely well in the pass rush. He's a phenomenal athlete when it comes to working up to the second level. My only question is, he's playing center. Jason Kelsey's moving on. Guess who I think is a really damn good center who I loved last year? Cam Jurgens from Nebraska. I think they're very similar players. So I like John Michael Schmitz. I just don't know if I like him going to Philly.
See, my thing is, though, he's a little bit of a bigger player. Like, that's a big center, 6'4", 320 pounds. That's closer to, like, more your customary guard weight. I think he can play either position. And Jurgens is probably a pure center because he might not even be 300 pounds.
He's like, barely
but, like,
300 pounds.
John Michael Schmitz, I think you can play either position, guard, center. I think he'll be really good. And I think, what he was able to do in that zone scheme that Minnesota runs, just really good. Get up. He could block guys one-on-one. He get up to linebackers, make good plays, and special athlete. I love this pick. I think he can play either position. I think him and Cam Jurgens fit really well together on the field at the same time.
That's actually wild that he's that big because I scouted him. I have his write-up, but it's like
I thought he was shorter than that.
He doesn't seem like that big because of how athletic he is. Like that, I guess, goes to show you how special John Michael Schmitz is. I believe he was a 6-year dude at Minnesota, but man, was that film good. And he was as impactful from a center position as you'll see. That'll do it for the first round mock. Interesting conversations about quarterbacks. I think that really, once you see the free agent market settle down and see where quarterbacks go and get a sense of what team really does need a quarterback, I think these mock drafts will get a little bit more clear. But again, appreciate you guys checking this out. If you do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let us know more in the comment section what you guys are thinking. Again, the beauty of draft season is talking prospects, is talking position fits, and we appreciate the support you guys have shown. Talk to y'all later. Peace.